You're listening to the Galaxy Poet Podcast, a new digital platform centered around art, the creative process, and creative solutions to problems facing our world. I am your host, Jordan Ferreira. Let's begin. Welcome to episode 4 of the Galaxy Poet Podcast. My guest today is an incredibly accomplished and talented multi-instrumentalist, vocalist, and songwriter. She was an original member for the band Cherry Bomb, based in Los Angeles, which later became Hey Violet. She's an incredibly perceptive, insightful person, and I know that a conversation with her regarding the entertainment industry will be a really fascinating kind of journey. So I'm really excited and proud to welcome Miranda Miller. Miranda, thank you for doing this.
Thanks for having me. I'm very excited.
Awesome. I greatly appreciate it. I think the last time I saw you was sometime last year in Los Angeles, while you were involved in the theatrical production of American Stranger. Mm-hmm. And I don't know if you remember, but I think after one of the showings, the cast and Laura, a mutual friend, we all went to a bar in Hollywood.
Mm-hmm.
And
I do remember, yes. That was a fun night.
That was fun. And that was really the first time I had a chance to sit down with you and talk about music and, the industry. And that conversation was incredibly insightful and inspiring to me, because on some level, I relate to what you were saying in terms of your experience and your journey and some of the things that happen on the business level. And but the truth is, I haven't experienced the height at that age the way that you did. And that's why I think it's fascinating to talk to you about what that was like. So I just wanted to ask you first, at that young of an age, being involved in, being assigned to a major label, being touring internationally, opening for the Smashing Pumpkins, the Foo Fighters, all that pressure, what was that experience like for you?
Well, what's funny is I started when I was about 12. I got in my first band, and it was kind of an accident. It became Cherry Bomb, right? So I had done musical theater my whole life. I had played instruments my whole life. My family is very into the arts and everything. I played some covers with this band. It was an all-girl rock band who were looking for someone who could play piano, guitar, and sing, right? So I was like, oh, I can do those things. So my mom was like, why don't you go try out? We were a cover band for a while, then we started doing originals that other people wrote, and then it eventually led to being signed to Hollywood Records and all this stuff. So I literally had never thought about being in a band in my life before this. So I will say the weird part of it is how many people in my life were like, oh my God, you're opening for this person, you're opening for these people, you're doing this thing. I dream of that, but that was never my dream. So I have a different experience than a lot of people, because it was never I get to do the thing that I've always wanted to do, because I didn't want to do it before. I just liked it as it went. And I would say when you're 12 and you do that for 10 years and you do that as you grow up as a teenager, as a young adult, it's so normal to you that it's almost hard to answer your question, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. Yeah, and that's surreal. I hear that story so often with people who, they say that being part of an ultra successful band was an accident. I hear that story, and it makes sense on some level, because the fact that it wasn't your ultimate goal, it's almost like that makes you the perfect person for that situation in a way. You know what I mean?
That's funny.
Yeah, it sort of makes you you're not too naive. You're kind of still objective, and you're not also jaded. Hopefully, you're not jaded, but I'm saying in general, But
I don't know about that. I'm a little jaded. So, yeah.
I don't think you're jaded. But that's so interesting. So having experienced what you've experienced in terms of the meteoric rise of particularly Hey Violet, that I think is almost unparalleled, and it's such a unique, singular experience. I'm sure it's you. I'm sure you've. I wouldn't want to speak for you, but in my view, it seemed so few people really would probably understand what that was like, because on the outside, maybe it's oh my God, you're doing everything. You're touring with 5 Seconds of Summer. You're blowing up, and then on the inside, you have the dynamic of not only the interior sort of situation with the band, but you also have pressure from the industry, from producers, from the, you know. So what was that like, apart from, you know, when you first started, more so getting into like working with acts like 5 Seconds of Summer and sort of feeling the pressure, you know, what was that like?
Yeah, there was pressure from a lot of directions. Also, it became from myself, I think. That dynamic was very difficult to manage. And knowing which pressures you'd actually succumb to and which ones you shouldn't. Yeah, it was different because when I first got into the band and I was all excited and I loved music, I had grown up with music, so I was excited to go home and practice for hours and get really good at playing, I don't know, one way or another on the keyboard, like whatever we were doing at the time. And it got to a point where I was no longer excited to practice. I felt like my job was social media and fan meetups and learning how to look the right way, you know, like that becomes a lot of your time. And that's when I think I started getting more and more miserable. And I would say towards the end, I really wasn't happy, but it's hard to tell the difference between this is normal and this is what I should be doing.
Wow. So, you know, that relates, like I relate to that on so many levels because in my own smaller experience, I feel like the moment you enter the industry, there's this realization, at least there was for me, and I'd love to hear if it was similar for you, but there's a realization of like, oh, the thing that compelled me to be a musician, that made me obsessed with learning about songwriting and production and performance, being a great singer, all these things, not saying that I am a great singer, but just saying to aspire, right? They're the exact opposite of what you need to be successful.
Yeah.
Is that what your experience is?
Yeah, totally. Because I've seen you perform and I know how talented you are. And I also have seen things that you release and it makes me realize that you could be successful and people not know how talented you are. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
I still think you're incredibly talented in what you do release. I just mean, that's not what people are looking at. And you look at the comments on videos, music videos of people, everything. It's like to this day, when I have a performance, I'm more worried about how my face looks than about how I sound. Because that's what people see and that's what people are paying attention to. Now, it's not 100% like that. Of course, I'm a perfectionist, so I want to sound good for me, but I know that most of your audience isn't going to hear that little difference. Yeah.
Do you think that's so much of that is just like kind of like the training of the industry where they kind of drill it into you, where they're like, you have to look good, you have to be like this on social media, you have to, you know, check these boxes A, B, and C, you have to do it. Like, do you think that's partly why that is still?
Oh, definitely. I think it is. You get, what's the word? Like Pavlov's dog.
Conditioned?
Conditioned, thank you. You get conditioned to present yourself a certain way. And that's why I'm good at some of the things I do now. Like I run a social media account for my parents' theater company. And my mom's always like, you're so good at this. And I'm like, yeah, because I had to be.
Right.
But I hate doing it for myself. That's why I never post. I resent that part so much that I'm like,
Yeah. And it's a skill that, especially now, it's almost more important than the art itself. And it's kind of baffling.
In some ways, yeah.
Yeah, in some ways, for sure. But, I was having this conversation with a friend recently, and he made the point that he was telling me, you need a massive ego to have any part in the entertainment industry. And I was like, well, why? And he was basically saying, it is so unstable on so many levels that the higher you climb, the more unstable it gets. And the only way to deal with that is to just have this secure sense of who you are and this massive ego. So what do you think about that? Do you think that's true, and do you relate to that in some ways?
Yes. I think my ego transpired in different ways than a lot of people's. And I think mine did turn into perfectionism, and it turned into insecurity because I didn't want to be that person. I didn't want to be the egoic, like, monster that you hear about who's a pain to work with. And so I just became a pain to work with in another way. And that's how, when I started melting down and all this stuff, because the pressure really did get to me. It really, really, really got to me. And I've always been a sensitive person, but I think they're right. And I think I was with relatively good people in the industry, but I do think I saw how everyone was corrupted by the industry, because I knew some of them since they were younger. And I still, I love them from afar. They can love me from afar. We have our differences. Whatever. I can just see, maybe not even how it corrupts people, but I do see how it changes people. And there's my jadedness. I don't always think it's for good.
And if you're comfortable, like, in what ways do you think that manifests in terms of change? Because I'm fascinated by that, and the impact the industry can have on people in that way.
I think how you perceive yourself starts to change. What I noticed years later is we did so many photo shoots and video shoots, and I'd see these pictures of myself that were totally photoshopped and be like, wow, I look so good. And then I'd look in the mirror and be like, I don't look like that. And then I'd feel like, I don't know, crap about myself. I don't know how do you curse on this podcast?
Oh, you can say whatever you want. Absolutely.
Actually, I think the girl in the first episode asked the same question.
Yeah.
I just watched that.
Yeah. Oh, cool.
And not to just harp on the looks thing, but I think that was a big realization of mine. But I think also how you interact with each other. It's very strange how you become conditioned in front of the camera when you're doing interviews or when you're on stage. You can get in a big, huge blowout fight and hate each other's guts, and then go in front of a camera and you're best friends. Yeah. Like that.
Right. And that can be confusing, right? Like, because in the moment before the camera turns on, you feel all those things. I mean, only speaking from my own experience, but I would imagine it's similar. Please correct me if I'm wrong, but being furious with someone for some reason, and then when the cameras turn on, you develop the skill of kind of just, I don't know what it is. I mean, kind of putting on the facade.
Stuff it down.
Yes, yeah. Exactly. And that doesn't seem to be healthy.
No, it's not. and I'm not even playing like I was the good guy in any of these situations. Yeah. I don't necessarily like who I became in any of it, and that's why I left. Because I was like, okay, I got to take responsibility for this. I don't like how I'm acting towards people. I don't like how people are acting towards me. I don't like what I'm spending my time on. And now I've been playing music with a band of people that I actually love and are very talented. And yeah, I still make myself look nice for shows and, do and promote on social media and all that. But it's nice to be able to appreciate that on the other side,
Yeah. Yeah, and I think I want to get to all that because I think you're incredibly talented, and I want people to know what you've been doing since all of this has happened, and I want people to hear what you've been working on. But I'm fascinated by this idea of pressure from the industry. Like, in your experience, was there a tremendous amount of pressure in terms of the artistic direction? Like, you must work with this producer, you must work with this songwriter. Was that kind of thing happening immediately?
Yeah. What's funny is I wanted to push back the most. And I think that should have been a red flag for me, is that I, didn't belong there anymore. Because, once management kind of settled on a producer for the last album, I was kind of, I didn't write any of those songs. I have writing credit. I took notes and gave feedback.
Right.
I didn't write any of those songs. I was not creatively involved. It definitely became, oh, we found this photographer we really like. This is what your photo shoot's going to look like. This is the clothes you're going to wear. This is what looks good on you. We want to sound like this. This person wrote this song. Do you like how it sounds? You guys can play it. Like it was so put together, that I almost didn't even feel that pressure anymore, because there was no pressure to be artistic anymore. I
Yeah.
just, I took control of my live show. That's what I liked to do. Now, no one's paying attention to the keyboardist usually. So what I liked to do, I had like my 2 keyboards set up. I wanted to play as many parts and sing as many parts as I could at a time to keep myself busy and to have fun on stage. And that was like my creative outlet. That's basically what I felt that I had left.
Wow. And I'm fascinated by this idea of like the creative direction, because it seems to me like all I know of Hey Violet is the first thing I had seen were some like promotional stills, and my first feeling was like, that feels really cool and authentic and like fun. And it was that kind of like a construct of the people like in the business that were saying, you look good wearing this, you must wear or was it like, did some of that come already from the members?
You know what? I'll say both.
Okay.
I would say it's more accurate to the other girls that were in the band.
Right.
Even maybe the guys, actually. I think I was the farthest away from, the aesthetic of the band, the sound of the band, stuff like that. To be fair, I also grew up doing theater, so I'm very used to chameleoning into whatever's happening.
Right.
So it didn't bother me at first. But it was a construct in that it was built upon whatever foundation was already there. I guess it's hard to say how much.
Sure. Now that changed though, because it seems to me like I listened to the music in preparation for this, and it seems like the Cherry Bomb stuff is to me is so fun. It's so cool. It's so energetic, and like I come from a rock background anyway, and I love rock music and the energy of the performance and the vocals and all that. Was that sort of like where the band's heart was, and then the change? It wasn't.
No.
Interesting.
No. Actually, I don't think any of us wrote any of those songs. It was like middle-aged men writing those songs for us. I wonder who's going to kill me after this podcast. But
we
I'm
can
ready for a fight.
That's so interesting.
Yeah, and don't get me wrong. Again, it was really fun. We got to open for the Foo Fighters, which that was awesome.
Damn.
I don't think their audience liked this at all, and it was a terrible show. But they were the nicest band, like the nicest guys. It was really cool. And then when we left that record label, we were kind of on our own terms, and we went through sort of what we called our crisis, and we started playing around with some really theatrical stuff, which I liked. That was one of my favorite times, actually, because we started doing a little bit of performance art, and I thought it was fun.
Yeah.
And we had some pop, some rock, whatever, but we all liked pop music, so going more alternative pop wasn't really against what we felt. I think that actually was towards what we felt. Yeah. Usually
it's the other way around, so that's really interesting. Mm-hmm. But I mean, in no way do I mean to like belittle the work, the pop work of Hey Violet, because I love the stuff that they did with you, and the stuff like I'm a fan.
There's some good songs, right?
Yeah, those songs are really good, man. The production's so great, and
it is.
So that's so fascinating. I feel like, in my own experience, having this kind of realization when you are under contract and you start realizing like things like ego and pride are put as the priority as opposed to, passion or conviction or taste or art or anything like that. Mm-hmm. It was very discouraging to me to see that in a multitude of ways. I can't say that I know what it's like to experience that at the level that you have, but is it discouraging to sort of your creative essence to sort of see that's sort of the process? Like even now, do you still kind of feel the remnants of that kind of epiphany?
Yeah, it was definitely kind of a slow burn epiphany, and I would say sometimes I a little bit resent the fact that I am kind of jaded about the arts and the music industry because it is what I know and what I love. And I, I don't, I think about doing something else and then I'm like, how could I stop doing this thing that I've done my whole life?
Yeah.
And then there have been periods of time where I've stopped doing theater, I've stopped doing music, and then I come back to it. And I think the biggest realization for me was that it's more important to find projects that I love, people that I love. And you know what I'll say is yeah, it is disappointing about like when I was in Hey Violet, but I will say I think they're more themselves without me, if that makes sense. And I think that they do enjoy what they do more than I did. I think it's more of their dream than it was mine. And I hope they continue to become more themselves, and I hope they get to continue taking more artistic liberty as they get older, and grow into whatever they're going to grow into. Because I do think that they're fulfilled by it. You know?
Yeah. And that's really...
Yeah, it depends.
Yeah. And that's ultimately it, right? I mean, if you're fulfilled as an artist in what you're doing, it's important. Sort of there's nothing more important, I guess, as an artist. But
Yeah.
so then I would say post the Hey Violet situation, I know that you're involved in musical theater. I know that you're involved in theatrical productions like American Stranger. Where is sort of your interest and your passion now? Like what is your dream now in terms of the arts?
I have no idea. Listen, if I could just get through the next year alive, that would be great. Because I feel like everyone's like, what dreams? We're just trying to survive right now, you know?
True.
I mean, I'm teaching music right now, which is nice. Sometimes I a little bit feel like I'm retired at a really young age, so I want to do more projects.
Yeah.
Which it sounds so funny to say. I just mean I don't want to become sedentary, you know, yet.
Yeah.
I got to be in Sweeney Todd earlier this year before everything shut down, and it made me realize how much I loved theater, how much I still love theater and performing.
Right.
And I've gotten to do music with our friend Laura and their band Make Believe Friends.
Yeah.
And she's the one who wrote American Stranger. She actually came to me for a voice lesson through the guitar store that I work at. And she must have liked me because she kept like showing me her music, and she was like, oh, do you want to record this song with us? And I was like, who is this lady? And then, you know, she lured me into her world and we do music together. She asked me to direct that show. I got to be in it with them.
Yeah.
I'm kind of all over the place.
No, I think that's amazing. Like to have that experience of, you know, touring at such a young age, being involved in sort of this, what seems to me like an overwhelming amount of pressure, but also like, you know, transcendent sort of, I'm sure there were amazing moments in that experience, but very confusing, it would seem, at least on the outside. So yeah, I want to talk to you about COVID then, because, you know, as you say, it's true. The industry and lives, everybody's life is pretty much on hold. And I've been thinking a lot about the impact on the entertainment industry, not just in the time between now and the vaccine, but in general. What do you think a post-COVID entertainment industry will look like?
That's a rough question. I don't know. I mean, what do you think a post-COVID world is going to look like? I mean, are we going to continue taking those extra precautions? It's like, not to say that it's the same situation, but a lot of people compare it to the 9/11 situation, where after 9/11 happened, now we have TSA, security is crazy. Those things were lasting. So are we going to do the same thing with health? I don't know. Right. I think it depends on how seriously people decide to take it. But as far as like getting paid as an artist right now, it's difficult, but we're adapting, I think. Yeah.
Well, I'm curious to ask you, because recently I've seen a few different things of artists that are doing virtual tours, right? A few different kind of creative ways of still performing, but adapting, as you say. And I had this feeling like in a post-COVID world, this is probably going to be the future. For example, there was one band that I've recently been turned on to called Wargasm from the UK, and they did a virtual tour opening for Youngblood, who I love, I think is great. And Wargasm is amazing. And all of their virtual shows for this virtual tour were done in a rehearsal space with live comment streaming. And I felt like, wow, that seems like the future to me. And that's just my take. That's cool.
Do you know who Joji is?
No.
So Joji, he used to be a YouTuber named Filthy Frank.
It's a great name, but no, I haven't.
Familiar? Okay. I wasn't a fan of him as a YouTuber. My boyfriend was. I was like, okay, enjoy that, whatever. But he's a musician now.
Okay.
And we both love his music, and we watched this live YouTube performance thing he did. I'm not sure. It might have been pre-recorded. But it was so... I wonder if I can find... I don't know if they show it anywhere, because you had to pay for tickets. But it was so creatively done and inspiring. And I find that things like that are so much more inspiring right now. Like, I don't know if you know, in downtown, there's a Stranger Things drive-through event.
I've heard of this. I haven't been to it, obviously.
So good.
But really?
We went to that too, and it's so well done. And as a performer, I would love to do something like that. It looks like so much fun. And you drive through this parking garage, and like each level is a different scene, basically.
Wow. How cool.
It's really cool.
Wow.
Like, people are creative. And I think that's the most exciting part about what will happen in the future, is at least we get some of those creative new things out of it.
Yeah. And I've noticed, like, perhaps it's a coincidence, I don't know, but I've noticed that, for example, on my YouTube feed, with no conscious like effort on my part, I've been seeing, since the pandemic, interesting, like, alternative, quirky artists show up. And I'm like, oh, really? What's this? Yeah, I've just been like, from 2020, and the artist will look interesting, and I'm like, what is this? And I'll click it, and the music will be great. It'll remind me of, like, in some cases David Bowie, and in some cases more, I guess, in the funk kind of pop side of things, but interesting. And it gives me hope that maybe this situation is an opportunity for everyone to reassess their priorities and kind of reassess their whole existence, really. And as it relates to entertainment, I think it could be an opportunity for this generation's Joni Mitchell or Bob Dylan or Jimi Hendrix to arrive. Do you think that's possible?
Oh, yeah. I mean, sure. I think our perception of artists is different now, so I don't know that, I don't know how to explain. Sometimes I just talk and then I'm like, I don't know where I'm going with that point. But you're naming these names, and I think it will be perceived differently. I don't know. But okay, so what do you think? I'm curious to hear what you think about how COVID is going to affect the arts, other than, actual real artists, we'll call them, coming out. It's so mean.
I actually think this could be an opportunity for real moving art that actually inspires in the way that maybe the Beatles or Jimi Hendrix did in the 60s. I feel like it seems like fertile ground for something like that to happen. Now, is it going to happen? I'm not really sure, but I'm hopeful, and I think it's possible. And for me, it's kind of encouraging in some ways, because I always felt like I was a bit of a rebel and an outsider as far as the industry was concerned. Like, on the one hand, in the music I was making, several years ago, it sort of sounded like Jimi Hendrix meets the Mars Volta meets System of a Down meets, like, there are all these different quirky influences. And then I sing and it sounds like Prince. So it's sort of like, it's like, what the fuck do you call that, But
well, that's the point, though, because you become your own genre or your own style.
I think so. I think that is what excites me about any artist, where you listen to
I have the same issue, because I would sing and sound like I was on stage on Broadway, but I can also play classical piano, and I can also play rock and pop,
So on that same point, I'm very curious, like, who were some of the informative influences growing up that really shaped and inspired you as the recording artist and the incredibly talented, performer and songwriter that you are today?
Thank you. And actually, this question excites me because I have so many. And I would say, firstly, so my grandpa taught me how to play piano. He also taught me how to play guitar. I started piano at 4, guitar at 6. He was a music teacher. My mom is a voice teacher.
So cool.
So yes, I became all of those things. My mom and my stepdad run a theater company, and that's why I've been on stage since I was 3. My dad has worked in radio, and he used to be a DJ back when those were relevant, like when actual people would go DJ parties.
Right.
And not just anyone with a Mac. And and my grandpa was also a jazz pianist. Okay, so I had pop and rock from my dad. I had theater from my mom. I had jazz and classical from my grandpa. And, more than that, really, they all like different things. But a big one for my dad and I was the Beatles. We bonded over that a lot, and we still do. We actually, a few years back, went on a road trip and listened to 5.5 hours of Beatles albums.
Amazing.
And we're huge fans of Paul McCartney, and we actually got to see him live together in Nashville, which was awesome.
Wow.
But I really like Third Eye Blind, and I really like Korn. So those were always my 3 artists I wanted to see live. And I got Paul McCartney, I got Third Eye Blind. I still haven't seen Korn live.
Wow.
Yeah, it's super random.
That's so cool, though. I love that. Like, I think Korn, we were just talking about Korn earlier. Like, Korn is really cool. And I think they don't get credit for, like, being a trailblazer of the 90s alternative scene at all.
Yeah, I really like that whole 90s nu metal scene, though.
Oh, my God.
I mean,
yeah.
I think that was such a cool time. I mean, God, people are going to look back at that one day and cringe, but...
But then of that 90s alternative scene, is there a moment that jumps out, like culturally, or like a certain film or album or something that's really inspiring or influential to you?
It's so funny. It kind of all blends in together. Probably because I was born in the 90s, so I was really young. And so it didn't really influence me in a way that I was conscious of.
Yeah.
But what I noticed when I got older is I would listen to old 90s rock, and I would get really nostalgic. And so that's what kind of sent me into that whole rediscovering 90s artists.
Yeah. That's cool. And in a lot of ways, it's been the same for me. Being born in the 90s and sort of now listening to something like, whether it's like Nirvana or the stuff that I grew up on that I was always in the background. It's like, wow, what a interesting moment for art. Like,
yeah.
You could be subversive. You could be Bjork. You could do something that's like... Yeah. Bjork is really strange sometimes, and she was a pop star. Strange. Yeah, and I love what?
She's awesome. My favorite director works with her a lot. Are you familiar with Michel Gondry?
Oh, I love... Yeah, he's amazing. Yeah, The Science of Sleep.
Okay, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yes. Wow, I've never met someone else who's watched that movie. Okay.
Yeah, I love that movie.
But... Eternal Sunshine of the Spotless Mind is my favorite movie.
Such a beautiful movie.
Jim Carrey and Kate Winslet are my favorites ever. What was my point? Oh yeah, just he works with her a lot and does. They've done a few music videos together. I got like a DVD of his work back when Netflix used to send out DVDs. I don't know if they still do that. And he's done some weird shit. Like he has some short films that are really deep, and then he has ones that are just really, really stupid, and that made me love him even more.
Isn't there a Bjork video that he directed where it's like she's escaping the dentist and then she climbs into a truck and there's a gorilla with a diamond in his mouth or something? Like, I vaguely remember this.
Yeah, I think I know which one you're talking about. I can picture it.
Like, oh my God, what an amazing video.
Like, what's going on?
Yeah. But so that music then wasn't really like, it wasn't informing what you wanted to do in Hey Violet. Was it more like the pop side of things was where you were sort of wanting to go, but it was sort of, what was the reason for then, staying in that rock world?
What do you mean staying in the rock world?
So I mean, like, in terms of what was the reason for making rock, rock music with that kind of energy and sort of being that kind of band,
Honestly, I think a big reason that's where it started was because the parents were heavily involved. All of our parents, we were very young when we started. I was the oldest member when we were Cherry Bomb. And so we all had parents who had different experience in the music industry or in music in general. And so they were guiding us a lot, like heavy-handedly, suggesting songs that we cover, helping us rehearse, helping us put shows together. I mean, all kinds of stuff. Like, and I think the fact that their taste was in it really influenced us, and that's just the direction we went.
Right. Do you see that as being something common in like the really the highest tiers of the industry, like parents having an incredible degree of control over younger sort of creatives, right? Maybe creatives that are involved with music or whatever it may be.
I honestly don't know. I haven't particularly noticed it as a pattern. I think a lot of adults in general will take control over younger people's music careers. I mean, even if, you look at something as extreme as like the K-pop world, where the parents are like, sure, have my kid for the rest of their lives. Like, you can do whatever you want. You're going to be a pop star. But I think whether it's parents or managers or anything like that, unless you're an extremely strong-willed child, you're going to be pushed around a little bit. Yeah.
Well, the reason I ask is because, my experience is different. It's much smaller, obviously, but I relate to what you're saying because, I was in a band when I was 15, 16 years old. We signed a record deal when we were 16. And the parents were sort of, they were really in charge of a lot of the creative decisions that were made. So I wonder if in the higher tiers of the industry, and even when there's so much, there's so much riding on the maybe not authenticity of the music, but authenticity of like who the person is or something. Maybe it's that same way. I'm not sure. So I thought you'd have,
It kind of makes sense. And actually, now that you're talking about that, I used to have a friend who was in a boy band, and I didn't know a lot about their situation, but it did seem very similar where the parents were involved. And I don't know that it can be any different. Like, how much can you do with your music career when you're 12, 13, 14, 15? You know what I mean? Like, how could you do that by yourself?
True.
I mean, do you feel like you could have? Like, let's say there were no parents involved in your situation. Would you have been able to manage any of the things you did?
It's an interesting question. I feel like in terms of the creative choices, I guess my sort of disenchantment with the earlier band that I was in was sort of that in the beginning, we kind of bonded over this idea that we all loved, progressive rock, progressive music, but particularly progressive rock. So I was such a fan of like Yes and King Crimson and Genesis and like kind of nerdy,
I love Genesis.
Yeah, awesome. But like progressive rock, and later discovered Dream Theater and Porcupine Tree and all these kind of progressive bands. And then what I saw happening was like we would put out an EP. We were very young. I was the oldest. I was 13. The drummer was like 9 or 10, which was insane. It's insane to see a 9-year-old play like Rush and yeah.
That's awesome.
It was cool. But so we started with this progressive rock angle, and then what gradually happened was that we were pushed into this radio rock kind of thing, which, I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with radio rock, but I feel like I would like for it to be unique, and what I was hearing when we did recordings and work with producers was that this doesn't really sound like me. It doesn't like... Right. The reason I got into art was because I wanted to be unique, and I wanted to, utilize this craft as a form of self-expression and really, dig into all that. But the producer wasn't interested. You know, many producers, most producers that I've worked with were not interested, you know, in hearing my thoughts. So is that a similar, do you relate to that in some way?
Actually, I think that is exactly where our perspectives are different, because I think growing up in theater made me actually a lot more passive when it came to creative control and just creative expression in general. I was always expressing myself through characters. I was expressing myself through other people. I wasn't being myself. I mean, you still, you know, you find yourself in a character, or you don't, and you just act it out. I don't know.
Yeah.
I guess I never was. I was a very quiet child. I was very well behaved. I always kept everything inside. I don't do that as much now, but because it's not fun. But I didn't really have that desire to just be like, listen to me, I'm gonna be myself in your face, you know?
Right. And what you say is really interesting, because I've never been a professional actor. I've never starred in a theatrical production or done anything like that, but I'm fascinated by film and performance and filmmaking, and I'm such a fan of all that. And I think there is a liberating thing when you are a character as opposed to the director, right? Because it's like the enormity of the project it's so intense that you have to surrender and be like, well, I don't know if the film's going to be good, but I mean, I'll do what I can as an actor. And it's like, you know,
Right.
I can't really control anything else. So it's kind of liberating. That it seems to me, you know, that philosophy.
That's interesting, yeah.
Yeah.
I think as a control freak, I don't necessarily get that feeling ever. You know, like I think even like when I did Sweeney Todd, I was in the ensemble, which is actually what I wanted to do. But even when I'm, you know, when I'm on stage, I'm still like, I gotta make everything perfect, because I gotta like hold my end of the ship up. I get so stressed. So I think I actually like being a director, because I get to dig my hands in and really oversee more of the project.
That's interesting. So in that regard, like, you do like having sort of you like being able to curate sort of the project and like where your involvement lays and stuff like that.
Yeah, it's funny. I think I've learned to take more control of my creative expression, and anywhere I can find it. I think
Right.
that's how I adapted.
Right.
So when I get the opportunity to direct, or I've choreographed shows, I've music directed shows, when I get the offer, I go, okay, what can I do with my part of the project? That's my thing now. Like right now, I've speaking of doing things on Zoom, doing things online, me and that band Make Believe Friends, the three of us have been doing Zoom open mics bi-weekly, which has been really fun. But I'm just a backup singer, and I love it. I'm just like, I'm just going to do what I want back here. Pay attention to her.
Is it liberating to kind of like to know that like the other parts of the band are being handled by people who are talented, and like you can just kind of lay back and have fun? Is that liberating?
Oh, totally. And I gotta say, we did like an actual online show a few months ago, and the most liberating thing, it was part show, part interview. And the most liberating thing was just deciding, like, I'm just gonna have fun. I don't care if I mess up. I'm not gonna be beating myself up for it. And I didn't, and it was awesome.
That's cool.
Yeah.
That's really cool. I'm glad that that's the point. Like that's where you are now. Like doing things that are creatively fulfilling to you and things that make you happy. Like, I think that's awesome. Because it seems to me like people who are trapped, or not, maybe perhaps not trapped, but like people who are caught up in that whole traditional, like the music industry thing and playing the game and sort of doing all the things that you are told that you have to do. Very few of those people seem to be happy to me, you know?
I think you're right. I think we've all gotten really good at showing the best parts of our lives and look at me, I'm so happy and I'm so perfect. And then behind the scenes, we're all huge messes.
Yeah.
I think that's just a cultural thing at this point, not even just music.
Do you see that changing anytime soon, or do you think that's just going to progress?
I mean, right now, no. I mean, from speaking from personal experiences, TMI, but I'm a giant mess right now. I mean, everything's so different and scary, you know?
Yeah.
And I think we all handle it in different ways. But I don't know. I do see some people trying to be more authentic. Some people fight against the fakeness.
Yeah.
I don't know.
I've noticed that too in the public sphere. Like even someone like Billie Eilish, who to me, I think people can have their own opinions about her, but I think she does seem to be very authentic, and the music she's making, I think, is authentic. And I'm a fan.
And I think in her interviews too, I think she does her best to just be herself and be honest, and it's nice to see that, because of course people aren't going to like it, but at least she's being not liked for herself and not pretending to be someone else and being liked.
Yeah. And just that kind of reminds me of, like, in my opinion, my favorite and most influential concert that I've ever been to was this band, the Mars Volta, in 2008. And the Mars Volta, well, I'm sure you're familiar with, but like they had a very loyal, and still have a very loyal fan base that's sort of like cult-like. It's sort of like the live show was sort of this once-in-a-lifetime experience, right? And the reason I related to it so much is that I went from going to concerts where it was very clear that the band was designing it to appease the fan. Like, here's the introduction, we hope you like it. Here's the set list, we did it just for you, we hope you like it, sure hope you love it. Like, to go from that to seeing the Mars Volta, where it was immediately clear, where it's like, we don't really give a fuck whether you like this or not, we're gonna do it because it's what we do, and if you like it, cool, and if not, we don't care. To the point where the singer, yeah. So do you find that inspiring in the same ways? Do you relate to that?
Yeah, I have. I'm actually not familiar with them at all. I've never heard of them. I do respect that. That's hard for me to do. I still want people to like my stuff.
Right. It's hard, certainly, but I thought, for me anyway, as someone who didn't know much about them at the time of seeing the show, I was just blown away. I wasn't used to seeing a band kind of break all the rules and yet still, earn fans, because they made a fan out of me, certainly, that night. But it was like, cool. Yeah, it was like 8-piece band, percussion, saxophone, 2 guitarists, and the singer literally just at the end of the show, he just said, "Thank you," dropped the mic, and that was it. And the crowd was crowd was asking for an encore, and they just left.
We're out. We're on to the next scene.
Yeah. But speaking of, kind of what you were saying before with things are different now. Things are a little, scarier now in terms of obviously the pandemic and everything is so up in the air, particularly with entertainment, right? Mm-hmm. I had read an article recently where it was talking about the level of the degree of mental I guess the decline of mental health in people, particularly who are involved in music, right? And it was something if you're involved in music, there's an 80% chance that you have there's 80% chance that there is some link to mental illness like anxiety and depression. Wow. And for me, I related to that because I certainly do feel that the qualities that made me kind of obsessive about music and practicing and all that, they're the same qualities that cause certain social atrophies. And
exactly, yes.
Yeah, is that the case for you?
Oh, totally. I'm it's the same part of me that's okay, I'm going to get this part perfect, or I'm going to, it's funny because, sorry, I just interrupted myself.
That's okay.
When I would do theater, etc., when I was younger and I wasn't so in my head yet, I was still a perfectionist. I was raised to be professional. I was taught how to do things professionally. I tried my best to do that. And then as you get older and all that stuff starts to build up, it spirals out into this quality that beats you up when you make a mistake. And then you start thinking things are mistakes that aren't even mistakes. I don't know if you've experienced that, where your head just starts going, oh, but what if that was wrong? What if that was bad? And it spirals. It's the same part of you that practices really hard. It's the same part of you that shows up on time. It's the same part of you that wants to do the best you can in any situation.
Yeah, I'm really bad with that. I'm still working on that. I put so much pressure on myself that I freeze. You know, I feel like my internal, you know, dialogue is sort of like, you know, this has to be great. It has to be your best work. You have to do everything you can to make it excellent.
Yeah.
And then I do that so much in my own head that it's I don't end up doing anything because I'm kind of like afraid that I can't do it or something. Mm-hmm. But is it similar for you in that way?
That's actually why, because I was telling you how nervous I was to talk about some of this stuff and put it out publicly. But the reason that I'm not doing it is because I'm now so aware of that part of me. The part of me that also went through hours and hours and hours of media training and knows what to say and what not to say. And I'm trying to untrain myself. Like what Sweeney Todd, which I was talking about earlier, I was just in the ensemble, and before the shows, every show was outside, full-fledged panic attack, crying, didn't want to go on stage.
Wow.
Like, that's just a reality of what it can spiral into.
Yeah.
But you kind of learn, okay, if I want to do this thing, I have to learn how to cope with it.
Yeah.
And then I think the more, you know, I don't know. I mean, we could talk for hours on mental health and how to cope with it and all that stuff, but it's a challenge, I think, for a lot of us.
Yeah, I relate to that, and I think particularly in the arts, it's something that's maybe not spoken of as much as I think it should be, you know, because,
sure.
I mean, look at all of the amazing artists that we've lost to suicide because of the nature of entertainment, right?
Listen, everyone has their vice in this industry. It's like, do you drink? Do you do drugs? Do you cheat? Do you cry? Do you scream? Do you yell? Do you fight? I just feel like everyone has their own thing, and, you know, I was never interested in drugs or anything like that, and so I just took to, you know, depression, anxiety, those things. It's just a different way of expressing the same thing, I think.
Yeah, that's beautifully said. So I think, you know, I want to get into your passion for theater, because theater is, in theatrical productions and what you've been working on, it's not necessarily something I'm very familiar with. So from an early age, like, what was it that sparked your kind of passion, your long-held passion for this art form?
Definitely a part of it, and probably why I like theater or music or anything in that sense is it was family connection.
Right.
It was also, I was not cool in middle school. Like, people didn't know me or like me, and I changed schools throughout I went to 10 different schools my whole life. Like, no, I'm not counting college. I'm counting elementary, middle, high schools.
Wow.
So I had a very hard time socially, and then what I found was I really liked theater kids. Funny enough, you wouldn't think of me as a theater kid because I can be very reserved. I can be very quiet. People are usually surprised that I am so into theater. But I think it was the social aspect of it. I think it was that I got to be good at it, you know, from doing it so often, doing a show like every month when I was a kid. Building that confidence is a lot of different things.
Yeah. And as far as the craft of acting, is that something that, like, you know, for me, that my only real entry point into that is my passion for cinema, but is that also something that, like, you were watching at an early age and kind of being inspired by and certain actresses and films?
Not really. You know, what's funny is there's so many movies that I haven't watched. I have a close friend and a boyfriend who are very, very into movies, and they always get mad at me for not having seen whatever movie they're talking about. I enjoy art. I enjoy movies. I never wanted to be a film actor. I never really was. I really just did theater, and I like the little bit of film and TV that I have done. I like theater better. I like that you get to create it right in front of people's eyes, and that
Right.
If something goes wrong, you have to just figure it out.
Right. Has that happened to you in a theatrical setting where, like, it was a really harrowing experience and you had to figure it out?
Oh, yes.
I'd imagine that's the
I have
case.
stories. I have stories.
Any stories that you like to share or no?
Yes. Okay. We'll share my favorite story. So, okay, my grandpa, when he was alive, did all kinds of stuff. Okay. He wrote a series of plays called the Sherlock Society. And it was about this group of kids who solved mysteries in their own neighborhood. It was really fun. A bunch of us got to do it while we were growing up. Every now and then he would be like, okay, I wrote the next one, and we would do it. And so most of the show is 5 kids. There's usually a couple extra characters who are in it a little bit, but it's really 5 kids holding the whole show together. And so our call time is an hour before show starts. And one of our 5 kids isn't there. And so we're calling the mom and trying to figure out where she is. I don't remember what happened, but she didn't show up. So we spent that hour rewriting the whole play to make it work without her.
Wow.
And like assigning her lines to people. There was this one scene between her and someone else that somebody turned into a monologue.
Wow.
It was so much fun. It was probably the most fun I've ever had, because and when you're a kid, you're not like worried about, is this going to be good? You're like, oh my gosh, I get to do this crazy thing last minute.
Yeah. That's so funny. I mean, yeah, that's awesome. That's kind of akin to like what I've heard people, musicians who say what it's like to be on something like Saturday Night Live, where it's sort of, minutes before you go on, it's sort of like, oh yeah, we're doing a rearrangement. We have to figure out an intro right now. 15 minutes. Oh, we have to figure it out right now. So get your guitar. And that's amazing. Do you think that kind of spurns like more creative writing and more creativity? That sense of urgency?
I mean, it probably depends on who you are. And I think certain kinds of pressure, well, like you were talking about earlier, certain kinds of pressure make me freeze. Certain kinds of pressure make me do better. Yeah. And I think it's probably different for everyone. Yeah.
Is it easy for you to tell which of the two is happening at any given moment? Because for me, it's not.
I think it is. I'm not to say that you're not self-aware, but I am overly self-aware, and so I think I can catch it, but that doesn't mean I can do anything about it.
Interesting.
So you don't really catch the difference?
Well, I think the problem sort of for me was like, I made this series of records with this amazing drummer, this Grammy-winning drummer, and he's my favorite drummer in the world. And we made these records, and the first record that we did, I felt was really inspired, and there was something that was sort of like guiding the creativity, and it was almost like I wasn't responsible for it, And I felt after that, the creative urge that impulse to create, where it's like you have something to say and you need to get to work, it wasn't there. And it freaked me out, because I think the nature of creativity is fleeting, for me anyway. Like certain creative projects, they seem to take on a life of their own, and others it's sort of like you have to really work hard at it, because that muse, so to speak, like is not necessarily there in that moment. And you don't get to choose the moments for me. So it was confusing, because all the things that I did that worked in the case of the first album didn't work for the second album. Like putting pressure on myself and trying to rev myself up to like, you have to do your best work. Like when I made the first album, it worked. It was great. And then I tried to apply that philosophy to the second one, and it made me get panic attacks and anxiety and like depression and horrible shit. So I wouldn't recommend it.
That makes sense to me, actually, because I think we spend so much time now trying to figure out the perfect formula to live our lives, and like the perfect formula to do this and the perfect formula to do that. And it just, I guess a lot of things don't work that way, even though we want them to. I feel the same way with poetry, where I will write a poem every day for a year, and then I won't write poetry for like 4 years.
Wow. Yeah, poetry is interesting in that way too, right? I mean, do you notice that with particularly like writing forms, that the creativity and the spark that kind of compels you to do creative work, it's fleeting. Do you find that for you?
Yeah, and what's interesting about the poetry thing is I never had the pressure on myself. Right. I always did it when I wanted to, and I think that's why I still love it so much. I actually just recently started writing again, almost out of necessity. I had such a low depression the other day. I actually shared it on social media. I shared my poem that I felt so compelled to write it on paper. And I just wrote out this poem that I was actually really proud of, and then I felt better. And I was like, oh, But like you're saying, that wouldn't work every time.
Right. I mean, for me, that's the case, but that's beautiful. I think that's cool that it was like cathartic and therapeutic, which art should be, I feel like.
Totally.
You know what? One of the reasons I really wanted to start doing this, you know, apart from sort of necessity because of lockdown and all this stuff, is that I was really like, I really missed having thought-provoking conversation with creative friends that and people that I don't know, and like that idea of like the exchange of, philosophies and kind of thoughts and tastes and art and all this stuff. It was very inspiring to me. And one of the things that's also inspiring to me is I think there could be something of value to perhaps the next generation of aspiring artists, whether they be filmmakers or authors or directors, in some of these conversations which are so often just private. And I wanted to ask you, because I think you've seen things in the entertainment industry that very few people have seen, like what it's like at the top, and I mean the top, touring, arenas all over the world and opening for, some of the greatest rock bands and most influential rock bands ever. You've seen that side of it, the good and the bad, and I'm wondering, what is your thought on like, what could you say to a 16-year-old aspiring idealistic artist that you think would help prepare them for the entertainment industry?
That's a hard question to answer, and I think I have a different perspective on it too, because I teach music and because I know how I talk to kids that want to do music.
Yeah.
And I would say my answer varies from person to person, and I find that with a lot of situations, at least with myself, I don't know. I very much like to understand a person and see where they're coming from and see what their actual desires are and see what their actual goals are. And I can see when someone should just do this as a hobby, and I can see when someone should do this as a career. Not should, but there's a difference.
Yes.
In drive, and there's a difference in how drawn they are to music and how easily they pick things up. But I would say, I guess, don't feel like you have to push through more negativity than you can handle. Like, yeah, it's good to go through some bad things to shape yourself as a person. Like, we all go through darkness often, and hopefully we come out on the other side better. But that doesn't mean you have to force yourself through. Sometimes that feeling is telling you to go somewhere else. And I think that's just sharpen that intuition of is this a gut feeling telling me to leave? Or is this something that I need to face head on? Is that too vague?
No, I think that's really profound. I've never heard it articulated like that, and I think that is really useful. Like that.
Thank you.
That's something that I wish someone would have told me when I was 16, for sure.
Yeah, same.
But like so many of these things I think of now, and I feel like I so wish someone would have like pulled me aside when I was 16 and just said, look, the music industry has nothing to do with selling music. Like, you need to understand that. And I feel like I probably wouldn't have listened, and I probably wouldn't have understood at that age, but it's something that became very clear once I was in the industry, That's something that's very helpful to new artists, I feel, because nobody really ever tells them some of these things that I think they really would benefit from knowing. And
that's why I like being open about this stuff, and why I appreciate your podcast and inviting me to do this. This is something I want to do. As scary as it is, I want to be vulnerable. I want to show people the stuff that I saw, the stuff that I went through. And I don't even think it's the worst of it. I've seen other people go through worse.
Yeah.
And I think people need to know that can be the reality. It doesn't have to be. And, what can we do to make that not the reality is a big question.
Yeah. And vulnerability as it relates to art, like how important do you think that is to truly great works of art?
Oh, super important. Unless you just want like a really good hit pop song, which nothing wrong with that. I enjoy those a lot.
Yeah.
But I mean, it's like I told you, I shared my depression poem on Facebook, so family and friends could see it, and I think the reason it made me feel so much better is because of people's response, and people not only cared, but they understood, and I think it helped them to see what they were feeling written out in a way where they went, oh, that's what I feel, or oh, someone else feels that, and I think that is what we innately desire.
I completely agree. So, kind of along those similar lines, but kind of branching out, I'm curious to hear your thoughts on what impact art can have. I mean, art untethered from not social constraints, but maybe like untethered by business influence, right? What impact do you think art can have now that can change cultural kind of priority? In other words, like there's so much idolatry happening with celebrity, and there's so much like materialistic obsession in America, it seems. What role do you think art can have in combating some of that or remedying some of it, if any?
I don't know. I really don't know. It's something I've thought about it's that age-old question of, does art imitate life or does life imitate art? I don't know. Can anything change until the culture changes? Is someone like Billie Eilish, maybe that does influence girls to be happier with their bodies if it doesn't look like everyone on Instagram. Maybe that does inspire people to do music that they don't want because they're like, well, she did it.
Right.
I don't know. I mean, what do you think?
Well, it's hard, right? I mean, I've spoken to a few people, and just in doing the podcast, it's something I'd like to ask, people that I admire, people I respect, and I've gotten interesting answers. The sentiment has usually been, look, art will not change the world, but it can be responsible for inspiring the individuals that do. And I think that was something that Eleanor had said in the first episode, and shout out to Eleanor. But I think that's true. And, I just wonder now, especially with COVID and this sort of reallocation of priority and people kind of resetting their lives, which I think there's a lot of benefit in that. I think art could have a role in, for example, inspiring a new generation to take the climate crisis seriously, which is something that confounds me that more is not being done, and it's something, as a vegan and as someone who's been very, very passionate about learning about this and kind of trying to tell people that this is serious. Like, yeah, okay, those, Trump's tax breaks, they're great if you have a certain amount of money, but what fucking use are those tax breaks going to be to you when you can't breathe air? Like, I mean, yeah. What do you think of all that?
Oh God, I have to say this year has pushed, I think, all of us to dig a little bit deeper when it comes to these things. And I find it's very overwhelming to me how much misinformation is out there, and it makes me not want to dig any deeper. And I think that might be on purpose.
Yeah.
I think everything is political. I think even art is political now.
Yes.
But I agree with you. I think, sometimes I do get really cynical and I think, oh, nothing that I do could ever affect someone. Nothing anyone ever does. Like, what does it matter if anyone does anything? And then I'll watch something or I'll experience something like that Stranger Things drive-through, which sounds so silly. But I mean, I drove out of there so inspired. And then I always remember, like, oh, we have impact on each other more than we want to.
Yeah. And it's funny because art is so humanizing. Like, it's one thing to have a certain amount of influence as a politician, but it's an entirely different thing, I think, to have, the respect and kind of love of an audience if you're an artist that does work that can inspire. Like, when you go see a film and the film is incredible and it's beautifully done, it's a very inspired narrative, you walk out of that cinema a slightly different person. And I think that's so powerful. Like, I wish art and self-expression and all of these things had more relevant socially, because there seems to be a devaluation of these things, and it's more about the facade and the theater and sort of the imagery, right?
Totally.
And it makes me sad.
I do think there's a balance. Like, I do think it's okay for some of it to be face value. Sometimes I want to just check out and watch something stupid.
Sure.
But not that often, because then you just feel like you're soulless, and I don't think anybody actually wants that. I agree. And I think the funny part is I see all these memes that are like, okay, so you're saying get a real job, but I mean, you're the one watching TV shows this whole pandemic. Like, what are the things getting you through COVID? Are the radio, Spotify, all the arts?
Yes.
And it's like, where's our money and where's our respect?
Yes, beautifully said. That is exactly, like, that couldn't have been said any more perfect. These are the things that people turn to during difficult times to help them get through it. And yet, culturally, it seems to be more and more devalued. So it's discouraging and confusing, but I think people haven't forgotten, People know, like, oh, I need to, I need to watch this film because it makes me laugh, and this has been a really difficult year. Or I need to listen to this album because it makes me feel really good, and I need, it's been a very bad feeling year, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just art's role to me. I'm fascinated to see, like, all the ways in which art, as it relates to the entertainment industry, and that balance between commerce and art, and I'm fascinated to see how that balance is weighed in the future.
Sure.
What do you think about? Oh, sorry. Did you have some? No. I was watching The Social Dilemma. Have you seen this documentary?
The Social Dilemma. That's the one. Yes, I have.
Okay, yeah, it's an amazing, like, horrifying, terrifying documentary, but it's amazing. It's about the nature of, like, artificial intelligence and sort of giving everyone a different set of information politically, so that like what they're more akin to maybe appreciating, that is what they're sent, only that, right? And it made me think about the nature of AI, and as that relates to music. I was reading this interview with Grimes, who I love, I think is amazing. And she was saying that, I believe we're coming to the end of art, human art, and that all art in the future will be made by machines. It will be unusual for art to be made by a human being. And I think she might be right. And I'm wondering, do you have any thoughts on that and that scenario?
That's so interesting. I mean, my thoughts are we're getting a robot apocalypse because, well, listen, the point I think of art is connection and storytelling. I think that's been like a thread throughout all of humanity. I mean, that's what people did. We see depicted like people doing like theatrical storytelling around a fire years and years ago. And I don't know. I mean, I guess if a robot is capable of doing that, I don't know. I guess my fear is that we're being spoon-fed so much of what we want and need that when do we become the people in WALL-E? I feel like that's pretty soon. Right.
Yeah, and it made me think that, okay, even now, just the idea of like an electric guitar in mainstream music, right? I think the perception in maybe people 18 and younger is that, like, what is that? That sounds old. You know what I mean?
You think so?
Well, I mean, maybe not the funk, clean kind of, funky guitar, but like distorted electric guitar. I feel like that's sort of the perception. And I get it. I think it's partly rock's fault, like this rock scene's fault, because rock is very stubborn in some ways, and they kind of like, this is who we are, this is what we do, and like, and I think that's hurt in the long run. So I understand it in some ways, but I think that in the same way that perception could be like, this is old, this is old fashioned, I don't like this. Turn on Drake, I want to hear Drake or The Weeknd. I could easily imagine a scenario 100 years from now, maybe less, where that same adolescent, that same 18-year-old is saying like, this was made by a person. Like, why the fuck would you listen to this? Give me like the AI.
That's funny. I've never thought about that, but we already have music made by AI. Like I mean, I know they do it in Japan where they have fake pop stars.
Oh yeah, Hatsune Miku, right?
Oh, I don't remember any of them, to be honest. It's been years since I've looked into them, but that's pretty wild. And then people like actually idolize them, so.
Yeah, there's like I show people this and they kind of get scared, but it's like there is a hologram named Hatsune Miku from Japan, and she is literally a hologram, and there's a synthesizer that the programmers and songwriters have made sound really vocal. I'm sure you've heard it, but like they did a whole album, and this hologram opened for Lady Gaga and played at the Best Buy theater, and people were like, there's people with glow sticks.
That.
It's insane. It's on YouTube.
Oh my god. I'm gonna have to look that up. That's so, yeah. Well, I think Grimes is right.
It seems like it, you know. I hope that the element of human music that I love and appreciate so much doesn't get lost in that way, but I don't know. I mean, vinyl is still around. I think there's hope. Like, people do seem to still love that analog experience.
People really like nostalgia, and I think that's why I mean, our music when I was in Hey Violet, a lot of it was inspired by 80s sound, and a lot of that has come back. And so I can also see if robot music is the thing of the future, I can also see those teenagers being like, oh, I want to listen to human music. And like, then they're the cool ones.
You're totally right. I could see that too. Like, after a certain amount of time where the AI music is like the norm, you'd have this little like subversive culture where it's like, fuck that robot music. I want to listen to some of this shit like played by people. It's punk rock.
It's
like
just a cycle. I think it's the same stuff over and over again. And it seems worse to us because we're like, oh my God, what if the things we know are going to die out? But like our parents thought that, their parents thought that. I think it's just a cycle.
That's true. And as far as the perception of like, the 18 years old and under kind of thinking rock is like old fashioned, maybe I'm completely wrong. And I think you would probably have more perspective on that than I would. Do you think, was that the case when you were doing all this touring and the arena shows and all that? Like, were they, I was just saying, like, was the audience sort of, did they think it was exciting that there was like a rock element to the pop music that you were doing in Hey Violet?
I don't know that they really knew the difference. I don't know. Not to say that they like can't tell the difference between genres. I more so mean, I think they just liked the music, and I don't know that they overthought about it. I don't know that they were that kind of fan base, right? Which is kind of nice. But I could be wrong. Nice. I don't know.
Maybe that's just me overanalyzing it. I think you're totally right. But it just seems that that's the perception. Like I have friends that are younger, and I'll try to play them something that's modern, but that has like electric guitar in it, and they'll be like, "Oh yeah, cool," and then they'll just kind of turn and listen to Drake, and nothing against Drake. I think Drake is cool, and I think The Weeknd is amazing, but it just makes me think like, wow, I feel like that has taken over the landscape that rock once had.
Sure, yeah, and I guess that's part of that never-ending cycle.
Yeah, wow. Yeah, it's a lot to think about, but it's, the Tim and Eric. Do you like Tim and Eric? That was a Tim and Eric reference. You haven't seen Tim and Eric?
I don't even know what that is.
Oh my God. They're this duo, this comedy duo that does like surreal comedy at 4 a.m. on Comedy Central. And I love it. I don't know if you like it, but it's pretty surreal. There's a meme of, if you look it up, there's just a guy's head exploding. He's doing this motion.
Oh, that's funny. And everyone's going to be like, you don't know who that is?
No, they're pretty well known, but they're also, they're not on TV all the time, Right. But that's fascinating. I think it's really interesting to talk to you because I think your perspective is so singular and so unique that someone who may be listening to this who wants to maybe start an all-girl band or start a rock band and like do the things that you've done, sign to a major label, tour internationally, build a fan base. To hear from you some of these things that I've only ever heard in private, I think it could help. It could inspire, I
hope so. And I hope it inspires people in different ways. I hope it inspires someone to go, oh, maybe that's not what I want to do. And I hope it inspires someone else to go, you know what? I do want to deal with that, Yeah. Like we all have to walk through different fires. So pick which one you want to walk through.
Absolutely. And when you were talking about like as a music teacher, and you are an amazing music teacher, I've taken piano lessons from you, and
Oh yeah.
I'm not a very good piano player yet, but I think it helped. It wasn't because of you, it's just because I play guitar and I think like a guitar player. As a music teacher, when you're dealing with younger students and you recognize the spark of like work ethic and the potential to turn this into a career, like how does that manifest in someone very young? Like, can you tell that, can you tell by the drive or like the passion? Like, what are the qualities?
I worked with one girl who, I want to say she was a preteen or a very young teen, who wrote her own songs since she was a little kid. She took piano from me because she wanted to learn to read sheet music better. She wanted to learn just piano skills better overall because she would write music. She would record it by herself. She did all kinds of stuff. And of course, her mom was heavily involved too. And that goes back around to that whole parent influence thing. And who knows if that will turn out good or bad. We can't tell. But I mean, I think it was the drive, and she had the same thing where the songs would come to her. You know,
Wow.
it was intuitive, I think. You know, a lot of kids are in lessons and they just don't know yet if it's for them or not, I find. Yeah, I don't know. I actually don't see it very often where I'm like, wow, they're going to really like go for it and make this a career. And I try to stay in the moment with them of like, what do I want to impart to them? And sometimes it's musically something. And sometimes I want to teach them how to commit to something and how to have work ethic and how to overcome an obstacle.
Yeah, that's such an important lesson, particularly for a younger student. That's amazing. I mean, to frame a lesson with like, no, you have to, you know, take a responsibility to like finish what you start, and that's an amazing life lesson outside of music.
And I think that's the point of anything, right? Is
Yeah.
how you play music is how you live your life. How you do anything is how you live your life.
Yeah, and I think music is interesting in that way because so many great life lessons can be kind of, they can be woven through the fabric of music, like anything from showing up to a session on time, making sure you have your parts down, you know, not wasting time in rehearsal, you know, being a good performer, taking the time to like research and think about what kind of artist you want to be, and all of these things, you know. Do you relate to that in any way?
Oh, totally. Yeah. And those were the things I was good at. I'm actually better at, you know, being on time, knowing my stuff, in certain situations,
Yeah.
than, you know, being creatively articulate all the time. And sometimes that's what gets you the job. Sometimes if you're fun to work with and the people like you and you're a good person and you do what you say you're going to do, I think that actually goes a really, really long way.
Yeah, I agree. And I think particularly like, for example, in the LA music scene, I know of a few people that, you know, I wouldn't necessarily consider them to be great in the craft of perhaps being a musician, but I recognize that there's a quality that's like, they're a genuinely nice person. I understand why that person is, for example, like getting certain gigs and doing well. Like, it makes sense. But at the same time, it sort of discourages me because it's like all of those things that I spend so much time on, and like, you know, listening to all of this music, listening to Alan Holdsworth and Paco de Lucia and Dream Theater, and sort of like trying to internalize like, how can I do my version of this? And like, it's sort of devalued in a way, but at the same time, I guess it's life, right? Life is sort of like that.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I mean, so little is in our control.
Yeah.
We kind of just, you know, if you want to be a great musician, be a great musician to the best of your ability, but that doesn't mean you're going to get anything, you know? Someone might be prettier, someone might be more professional, someone might just have the right connections.
Yeah. And in music, I think driving that point home to young artists is so important because rejection is the norm.
Oh, yeah.
I mean, trying to get a record deal and all of this stuff, you get rejected so many times.
Yeah. And you know, it won't, you won't realize how many times you're being rejected. At least this was true with myself. I would look back, and in hindsight I was like, wow, I was facing rejection all the time, and it knocked me down, and I'm still learning to rebuild that confidence. So I think it's definitely important for people to understand that going into it.
Yeah, I agree. And it's something that, again, I've never heard spoken of, really. Like, you hear people say, like, oh, you know, just don't give up. I've heard that plenty of times.
Yeah, exactly.
But, like, you know, to face the kind of rejection that you face when you're in entertainment. I mean, in film, it seems to be even worse. But yeah, at least with a label, they cannot respond, right? Like with an audition, it's like you do an audition, then you walk out, and then it's sort of like, I mean, I guess you don't hear back either way. It's similar.
Yeah, it's, yeah. I had friends who were in TV and film, that world, and I remember I would always be like, you guys have it worse, and they would always be like, no, you have it worse.
Wow.
Because different good and bad experiences in both.
Wow. I would be fascinated to know why they saw music as worse, because I always tell whatever, you know, some actor friends I have, like, film looks way worse. The politics and, like, oh my God, the amount of, like, sycophantic kind of bullshit you have to deal with, like, good God.
I don't know. I honestly don't remember. It's been so long since I've had that conversation, and I haven't talked to anyone about TV and film in forever.
Yeah. No, I'm fascinated by that. But even in theater, is it similar, like, for you, like, that sense of you know, dealing, I mean, not necessarily with rejection, because you're doing your own theatrical productions, and, you know, you're an amazing talent in that regard. But I feel like that concept of, you know, contending with maybe the pressure, let's say, of that medium, like, is that something you still struggle with in the creation?
I struggle with the pressure more because of my experiences in the music industry.
Wow.
That's kind of bled into my theater stuff, which is fine. I think I will come to a point where it's not as big of a deal anymore. But I don't think I put myself as much in the way of rejection when it comes to theater, and I don't think I faced as much rejection. I got cast a lot. In fact, I tend to get cast when I audition for theatrical things. When I audition for TV and film, I tend to not get cast. They just don't want me. I think I just am better at the other thing. So, yeah, I mean, of course I've had rejections in theater, but not to the same degree, and I never went after it professionally, like, this is what I want to make my living off of.
Yeah. But was that even before, like, let's say, Hey Violet was really, you know, kind of doing the things that they're doing and doing the things that you did with them, like, was the theater always an aspiration of yours to really, like, go full force at being like maybe a director or an actress in that way?
Yeah. I think for most of the time I was in the band, most of the time growing up, I wanted to be on Broadway. That was my goal. It's funny because that's not really a goal of mine now. I don't know that I really know. I don't know. I think I've kind of given up on that, like, big goal idea. I kind of just, my goal is to be able to have the freedom to do projects that I want. I don't even know if I mentioned this, but I was just in a live Zoom production of A Christmas Carol.
No, that's awesome.
Yeah, that my mom wrote an adaptation of Christmas Carol, and we've done it for years on the stage. It's like a tradition at our theater, and I've been in it several times. And my stepdad directed it and also played Scrooge, and wow. It went really well. It was really cool, but I just enjoy the freedom to be able to do that stuff, you know?
Yeah, that's cool. So then, like, what was that moment where you sort of internalized that understanding that, you know, I don't want to necessarily have big picture goals. Like, I want to just focus on things in the moment that make me happy, creative projects. Like, do you remember that shift, and what was that for you?
I think just quitting that band.
Okay.
And mourning all of that situation, and then on the other side of it, I was like, okay, what do I do? And I was like, okay, I have to get real people jobs. And so I worked in food for a while, and I was terrible at it. I was awful. I hated it. I hated every second of it. And then as I like kind of got rid of that fear a little bit of coming back into the world, and I was like, okay, I could totally make music. Sorry, I could totally make money teaching music, and then that's kind of a nice balance between keeping myself afloat and doing something music related.
Right.
And then I slowly like dipped my toes back in the pool for performing.
That's cool. So then now, like, the whole idea for perhaps you to like be part of another band and do all the touring thing, like, that's not where your head's at. That's not where your passion is, right?
I've gone back and forth on that, and I think the women I'm doing music with right now, I have a feeling that once all the COVID stuff is over, that eventually they're going to be like, hey, would you want to, join us for just like a small tour or something like that? And that's definitely something I'd have to think about when we get to it, because I love routine. I love being at home. I like being able to see my family and my friends.
Yeah.
That I really appreciate that now.
Yeah. And
But I do miss traveling. I don't know.
traveling must be fun, right? Seeing Japan and
Oh,
God, Japan, I want to go so bad. I've never been, you know.
it was incredible. Oh my God. I want to go back.
What was your experience like going to Japan?
Well, we went to Tokyo and we went to Osaka, which are two very different places. Because Tokyo is very what you think of when you think of Japan, at least what America thinks of Japan. Tokyo is very flashy and bright. It's like New York on crack. It's like crazy. Arcades everywhere and vending machines everywhere, and just all kinds of really interesting things that catch your eye, catch your ear, just very alive and modern. And then Osaka is very traditional and quiet. And so when we were there, we went and saw some old, what's the word, like places of, not places of worship, but what are they called? I don't know.
Like
Just
temples?
old traditional temples. Thank
Oh,
you.
temples. No worries.
I can't do words today. I'm like,
You're doing
my
awesome.
brain.
This is so much fun.
I'm glad you think so.
I'm having a blast. Yeah, this is fun. But
This is good. Yeah. Go ahead.
I was just gonna say that's amazing. That's amazing that on one level Japan can be flashy and futuristic and so exciting, and then on the other level it's quite traditional, and you see so many of like the antiquities and the temples. Like, that must be a really amazing experience.
Yeah, it was cool. It's cool to see both extremes. Yeah, I would kill to go back. It was really cool.
Yeah, but I think it must be so disorienting to travel, and particularly the way you travel and how much you traveled in Hey Violet, because my God, like your sense of where you are and what you're doing at any given moment is like different, right? You wake up in a new city every day and you're like, where the fuck am I? What am I doing again? Oh yeah, we're playing. How much time do we
We had
have?
to like look at a piece of paper with our schedule on it to know what city we're in, and we're like, are we in the same time zone? Did we change time? Where are we playing a show today, or is it an off day?
Oh my God. Yeah. That seems disorienting, particularly for someone like so young. I mean, on one level, it was kind of, that was something that I really aspired to and I always wanted to do. But on the other level, I think about it and I think like, that must be really disorienting. Even if you are with your best friends and maybe your family's there or whatever, like, it must take its toll.
It did on me for sure. I think I am a little more wired to want things to stay the same so that I can, work towards my goals and whatever. And it's weird to not get enough sleep, not get the right kinds of food, feel like you spend a bunch of hours backstage just waiting for a show because you have nothing else to do.
Yeah.
And yeah, it is. It's very disorienting, and I feel like I still sometimes am adjusting to normal life.
Even now, you feel like a detox kind of that lifestyle?
Yeah, and that might sound dramatic, but I think it's because I'm so aware of the effect it had on me.
Wow.
That I'm still adjusting to what I want to do with my time. I got so used to takeout that I had to learn how to cook and to not just Postmates all the time. There's just little things like that where I'm like, oh, I have to be a regular adult.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I relate to that just in the sense of like having done a handful of just U.S. tours, and that experience when you come home and you're happy to be home and you're relaxed, and then the day after you're like, okay, when's the next gig? You're already ready to like go. Like for me, that's what it was like. So it's interesting to hear your take on it.
Post-tour depression was the worst. Like we all got it, I remember. I don't know if they still get it. I don't even know if they tour, to be honest. But when we would come back home, we'd all be like, oh my God, what do we do? This is torturous. And you're so used to being around 12 people at a time, cramped on the bus. It's very disorienting to go back to. I agree.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, for me, it was, and what I experienced was nothing on the same level of what you've experienced with the arena shows and the success at that young of an age. That must be like so much to cope with, so confusing.
It is for me. I think it was for them too. Actually, I think I think they were better at adapting to that environment than I was.
Right.
And that's fine. But I do still find myself coping with even the rejection that we talked about, and the perfectionism, and the disorientation, if that's a word, of traveling, and of being, having your schedule laid out for you every day. This is what you're doing today. And so now I have to take control of that. And it is very different. And, it's been a few years, so I've gotten good at a lot of it.
Yeah.
But those are your formative years. So it's strange.
Yeah. Yeah. And yeah, it's a lot to take in, because I certainly remember like my experience and being, a teenager and being signed to a record deal and being in a band with your best friends, and then having this dynamic where it's like you realize that internally something's not quite right. Like you realize I should be happy, and that makes you feel guilty, but you're like, there's something about what I'm doing that doesn't feel right. And it's like you don't want to walk away, but it becomes like a chore and a job to sort of keep doing what you're doing. So is that something similar to what you experienced?
The guilt a lot, because, even family members, and this isn't to put them down at all, like I would think that's cool too. They'd be like, oh, it's so cool that you get to do this, like that you get to, while you're young, take advantage of it, travel, get all these cool experiences, or like, I would love to open for them. You must have the best life. People do think that your life is different than it is, and that's kind of your job.
Yeah.
Like you kind of are supposed to present yourself as this polished, I have all my shit together person, and that you're kind of a product. And so that bleeds into your personal life too.
Yes.
And I find I'm still learning to not be a product in front of people. And I actually try to, you can probably tell I overcompensate. I try to be overly vulnerable and honest about what I'm thinking and feeling, because I don't like that other part of me that's a product and knows how to come across a certain way, and
Yeah.
I don't know. It feels dishonest to me.
Yes, and that was a major issue for me as well, and particularly like when we're talking about ego. The thing that made me feel very strange is that, like, on the one hand, I understood, like, when you go to an A-list party in the Hollywood Hills, and you're walking into a room and there are A-list stars everywhere, you kind of do need to show up, and you need to be secure in yourself. You need to, like, not be intimidated and all these things. And I think there's value to that for sure. But what bothered me is that it kind of warped my perception of like how I saw myself, as I think you mentioned, and also just like how I interacted with people, because it was almost like, I was so used to being in these really high pressure situations with people in the industry, and bringing that ego and making sure like you step foot in a room, or you set foot in a room, and you're not intimidated, and you don't care that whoever is there, or whatever A-list star you might have seen in the film before, the night before, you have to kind of bring it. But then you're having a conversation with a family member, and you kind of still have that sense of ego. And there's some moments where I was like, do do I really want to be that guy? Do I really want to do that?
I totally understand, and I feel very much the same. And I think I just recently have started undoing that.
Wow.
Where when I go visit, non-immediate family, I'm starting to go, okay, can I just be a human with them? And can I also show them that I'm just a human? Because, I'm almost intimidated by their way of life. Like, I have family who live in small farm towns, and I'm over here in Los Angeles, have toured the world. Like, our lives are very different. And so I think, there's a lot of distance, but I try to bridge that gap because I agree. I feel the same way.
Yeah. And that's why I think these conversations are really important, because how many artists struggle with this internally and probably maybe even hide some of it from their own therapists. And like, I've heard stories of pop stars that are afraid to even go to their therapist because they're afraid their therapist will leak the story to the press about how this person's doing this. And I think that's so sad.
It is. That's so sad. And there's this bubble that can't be burst. And depending on how famous you are and how different from yourself you are, I think the bigger the ego, the bigger the bubble, the bigger the burst too. If something does get out, or even if they burst their own bubble, people can't be honest with themselves because they don't want to burst that bubble. I'm like, burst all the bubbles, all of them. It's better.
I think that's a great lesson, though. The bigger the bigger the bubble, the bigger the burst. I think that's
I'm gonna tattoo that on my face.
That's a great tattoo. I feel like that's really important for people to know, like, and especially with the instability. I feel like when my friend was talking about, you need a massive ego because the higher up the ladder you get, the more crazy shit gets, the more unstable everything gets. And I feel like that must kind of be true. It seems like it is. And it's sad, and it's kind of why you see all these stories of, like, these stars that kind of go through these really tumultuous, challenging times in public, right? Like the Britney Spears thing or whatever it may be,
Yep. We all laughed at her then, and now we're all like, I kind of understand.
Yeah. And the fact that she came back from that, I think, is actually really amazing. Like, she's kind of doing better now than she was before then.
And her career was heavily, heavily controlled by other people. I think still is. Isn't there a controversy about how her whole life is controlled? Yeah,
her father, I think, owns, like, he essentially is, like, the architect of Britney Spears. And he, to this day, still controls, I don't know if it's her day-to-day, but, like, her creative existence, which is stunning to me. But yeah, I think, like I was saying, like, these conversations that are mostly had in private with regard to entertainment, I think it's really important to have a public forum for these conversations, because I would like, the 16-year-old that I was, I would like that person now to just hear these things and at least maybe think about them. Maybe they'll just be like, oh, fuck that guy, I'm not going to listen to him. And I get it, it's fine, but, like, at least there is some introduction to these ideas, which way they will be acquainted with one way or the other, No,
I love that you're doing this because, it's hard to find people who are willing to talk about this stuff.
Yeah. And I think that's an inspiring note to wrap it up on. And I want to say, like, seriously, thank you for doing this. And I think you're a badass. I would love to do another one with you. I'd love to have you back on. And this has been really fun, Miranda. Thank you.
Yeah, it has been. Thank you. It's nice to have, like, a conversation in 2020.
Yeah, absolutely. A virtual one, but still one.
Close enough.
Close enough. Thank you, Miranda.
Thank you.